What does loving your neighbor actually look like? This is Journey with Care, where curious Canadians get inspired to love others well through real-life stories and honest conversations. Hey, before we get started, I just want to remind listeners that Journey with Prayer, our 5-minute prayer and activation series, based on each Journey with Care episode, can be found on its own podcast feed. Find it on your favorite podcast player or check the show notes to subscribe and follow. Let's take these interviews from the head to the heart, every week on Journey with Prayer. Okay, we are back with the Journey with Care podcast. It's Johan here. I missed last week because, as Wendi mentioned, I was working on a special little project that more information will be coming out soon. And Wendi, we are kicking off a new series.
Yeah, I'm excited that we have a new series kicking off today called Differently Wired Together. And we've got several episodes in store that I think our listeners are in for a treat. In this series, we can expect to hear from a lot of different people with different perspectives and experiences related to neurodiversities and people with disabilities, people living with mental illness, and those that are caregiving in these spaces. It is a place that I feel that we as a church have a lot to talk about and a lot to learn and grow in to create belonging for the whole community, because there's an illusion that there's this baseline of what normal is, and yet we often don't necessarily realize the challenges and the barriers that are there for people that are differently wired. It's just a kind of broad term that we're referring to here. But to kick off our series, I am so excited. I met a pastor. As you know, I was in Calgary recently speaking at the One Conference with Global Leadership Network Canada. And at this conference, I got to meet a pastor at Center Street Church, Corinne Thomas. She's a pastor of special needs. And welcome to the podcast, Corinne.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here today.
Well, I was so excited to meet you at your church in new facilities that are being launched there in Calgary, and the many good things that you're doing, but particularly the role that you have. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you do at Center Street? And I'd also love to dig into what got you down this path.
Well, yeah, I do a lot at the church. And I just love every minute of it. So actually, I'm going to start back and tell you a little bit of how I got into it, because it really plays into, I think, why I do what I do, and I love what I do. I felt God call me back when I was 16 years old to work with people with disabilities. There's nobody in my family. I'm not impacted that way. But just when I was 16 years old, I was working at a summer camp and just had the opportunity to love on this young girl with Down syndrome. And that's just where my passion started. And so being relatively new to this, I wanted to go to university. So I enrolled in a college here in Calgary, and they actually needed to do a practicum before even being enrolled. And I wasn't going to Center Street Church at the time, but decided to contact them because I knew they had this newly formed special needs ministry. So I signed up and started teaching Sunday school to 3 kids with different diagnoses. And that was almost 30 years ago.
I love what I hear you saying. It was that one girl, that one child in camp that changed the trajectory and gave you that aha moment. She taught you what you needed and awoke at something in you. And you just took one step in front of the other. And you made yourself available to teach these 3 children in a church. That's beautiful. So then what happened?
So like I was saying, it was almost 30 years that I was volunteering there. One of my passions is looking at the whole person and how important the spiritual component of this group of people is. And so that was just something always on my mind. But my career is actually mostly in and I'm using quotation marks here, the secular disability world. I've worked in many different agencies and organizations, including government bodies over the years. And why I say this and why it's really a neat part of my story is 7 years ago, I came on as the pastor of the special needs ministry, totally thinking I was going to do this one role and do it well, because God called me to it. So of course he's going to be with me and do all this. But I'm just seeing how my history of working in the secular world of disability has really broadened the scope of what we can do as a ministry to help families. It isn't just the spiritual component, which is what I love and what I'm passionate about, but it really is looking at the whole person and helping them and helping their families navigate through the complicated system of having a child with a disability. So I just love God's hand in my whole journey story. So
Yeah. And I love the fact that it was actually within the other sector outside the church that had something to teach you to bring into the church. How was that transition from working with outside the church in these spaces in specialization that taught you a lot and had something to offer the church? How was that transition bringing that into a church setting?
Oh, it was a real learning curve because the church is almost a different world when it comes to people with special needs, disabilities, looking at the whole person, the spiritual side, and just constantly going back to different Bible passages and speaking about, every person is made in the image of God. He created them with a purpose. They have gifts and talents and things like that. That is missed a lot. It's getting there. Like we have the gifts and capacities approaches and things like that, but they're very different. And it was a big learning curve for me. It very much shaped how we're able to really support and love the people that are part of this ministry. And my coordinator also has a degree in community disability and rehab as well. And so it's really great to see the pairing that we're doing to bring both worlds somewhat together, but recognizing their differences, but being able to support in a really holistic manner. So I think it's been a blessing, but a challenge too.
And do you have a large congregation in those that you are pastoring at Centre Street? I know Centre Street in Calgary is a huge church, but what does that look like for those with special needs in your pastoral care?
Well, we have two very distinct groups that are part of the special needs ministry. Our adult ministry, which probably takes up about 75%, and we have close to probably 100 families or individuals. Individuals, when they're adults, tend to make Centre Street Church their church, and their parents can still attend their home church. So I'm not necessarily supporting whole families when it comes to the adult group, but there is almost 100 of them, and I would say close to 50 parents with younger children that we're supporting in that world as well. So very different. And of course, then we have the ones that are kind of falling through the cracks that maybe have not a significant developmental disability, but still need some supports. We have one individual that is in a wheelchair and should have a power chair, but he doesn't right now. And so just even having someone meet him at the door to wheel him into the worship center and then back out, just providing those back end supports. So our group can attend church and be filled with the love of God and the messages that he has for them.
Yeah, so that they feel included and are included in the bigger body of Christ. And I guess that's one of the things that we're looking at in the Differently Wired. When we talk about that, each individual is so uniquely created and loved by God and has different needs, as we all have different needs. But I think a lot of people get by because we don't have any of neurodifferences or things like that. When we're looking at Differently Wired in community, we're looking at that we are all made in the image of God. We are all created differently with different unique experiences and wiring, giftings, and certain tragedies or disabilities or other, for whatever circumstance, has created a package we each come with when we come into the church. And we don't want to really focus on labels that they are this and that person is this. We want to look at them as whole created beings in the image of God, each made equal in the image of God. But when we're looking at special needs, we have to also acknowledge that there are certain things that in order to love them, their true authentic self, we need to accept them for who they are and what they bring and to see them for who they really are. And so rather than looking at the labeling of, like, you will hear the term out there in society, neurodiversities, what we're looking at is, what is it like for a person with autism to experience church? And how can we really love them? When a person comes in with ADHD, what does that look like and what is their experience? How can we accommodate so that they really feel connected and belonging? These are some things that speak near and dear to my heart because I live with people with these diversities. And quite honestly, there's a lot of churches we cannot be part of, not because churches are trying to be unwelcoming, but there's signals and things that they just do not fit. I think of neurodiversities is really like Apple and Android. It's not so much of a disability, but we're just wired differently. And I wouldn't have known this had I not walked with others. Do you experience that as well?
Oh, absolutely. Everybody comes with their own set of things that make them unique. And we want to work on having the goal of acceptance, belonging. And so what does that work look like? working with them, working with their parents. For example, we have one family who has a son on the spectrum, and yeah, he cannot attend church. Our church is huge, like you saw. Like we have, I think, 2,000 people that can sit in our worship center. That is just too much for some of our people. And so we have an overflow room that was just available that if church ever got too full, usually on Easter or Christmas, that we would open it up for them. And so I just went to our guest services team and I said, hey, if we have this room already, can we just open it up at the beginning of the service and just have families come? And it's right near our west door. So they basically walk in and walk right into that room. They don't have to actually walk through our whole atrium. They don't have to enter the worship center, and they can experience, there's 4 or 5 families because we've just launched this since Easter. So it's still pretty new, but an opportunity for them to come. And it's not a specifically, a sensory room or a disability room or anything like that. It's just a space that people can come, even if the church is too loud. Like, yeah, sometimes our music gets loud. Sometimes the lights are a little bit bright for people. So it's just where we've dimmed the lights, the music or the sound is quieter, and it's a smaller space. Everybody is welcome in that space just as much as people are welcome in our big worship center.
It is good to see that there is a church out there that's getting ahead of the curve and making a space for...
Getting ahead, I think they're catching up because everywhere else in society, in the malls and schools, they're doing this. I think it's beautiful that the church is doing it.
And even the movie theaters have caught on to this. Like they have nights where it's a lot quieter, where the lights are on a little bit, so it's not so much contrast in there. So it's really good that the church is starting to catch up, hopefully, and we have a lot of work to do, obviously. So
I love it. And also, this is a neat fun fact. Yes, you need space to do it, and some churches will have those constraints. But it's not a huge budgetary item. It's just a matter of seeing the child, seeing the family and the needs, and really listening. You wouldn't have known that they needed this had you not listened to that family and their sense of belonging. And whatever we come with, we know when we fit. We know when we are cherished and beloved. And you made that accommodation, which is beautiful. Then we have some more obvious things, like you were talking about somebody in a wheelchair. There's simple things of becoming more accessible for like physical disabilities and other things. What kind of accommodations have you had to make for people with visible disabilities?
It's about making the church accessible in terms of physical situations as much as possible. Like with all of our renovations, for instance, we've widened all of our hallways because we have a couple of people that are in wheelchairs that are actually in oversized wheelchairs. So yeah, we've met the building standards, but we've exceeded them by making hallways a little bit bigger. We've made a lot of open spaces, lots of areas where, there is things that are just movable so that we're not set with a big board table in the middle of a room, like traditional kind of ways. So there's lots of multi-use spaces. I'm very excited with our new space. We actually do have a sensory room that we're developing, and I'm super excited to be able to use that when it's done. We are in the process of working with a consultant to get it all put together, but just opportunities for those that need a little bit more stimulus or those that need a little bit less, and how working through that as an opportunity for kids or adults that just need help with regulation. But another part of it too is just really taking time to train our volunteers on how to just navigate, because that's one of the big things that I see is people don't know what they don't know. There's stigma out there. There's discrimination out there. I hate to say it, but it's true. In our churches, it's there as well. So raising awareness and just providing extra training, even as simple as how do you talk to someone who is nonverbal? We have one guy that is the most social guy, and he's wired to be social, but he's not very limited in a traditional speaking, but he has an iPad. So just going around and talking to a few key people saying, when he comes up to you, take the time because he's going to type it out on his iPad. So take that time and do that. And so he has made some really great connections, and he feels like he belongs, and he does belong because he's made these connections because me going behind the scenes and supporting him so that he can be successful in terms of having a place and feeling connected. And so I feel that that's a lot of what we do as a special needs ministry sometimes is like just being the back end to build a structure and a foundation so that people can be more successful, not be scared, not know what to do so they don't do anything. And I think that just raising that awareness has just come a long way for our church community just to feel more comfortable with this population that is more and more visible within our community, our church community.
I love that, because what you're telling me is that belonging, that sense of belonging is co-created together with the volunteer and the one with whatever presenting disability, that they're learning together to connect together and not just being served, but to actually have something to offer and to teach the rest of the church that what belonging looks like. And that is a beautiful example. And I saw that firsthand in just the facilities that you created and everything. And I think that's just a beautiful thing. I would imagine that if I was the person on this journey in a wheelchair, if I rolled through those hallways, I would feel seen and I would feel loved beyond words, right? Beyond saying Jesus loves you just the way you are, and yet you're being squeezed out of the hallway and normal interactions. It wouldn't do it, but you really demonstrated it. And I think that's takes a lot of intentionality and putting it into budget so that churches put their money where their mouth is. If they say that everybody's equal, how are we reflecting that to create that equality within our spaces in a very practical sense, in the sensory rooms and those things? Because when I came through your church, I'm like, oh, this is where my family could fit. And I loved that. I felt loved as a parent in your hallways.
Oh, well, that's good. Glad to hear that. Yeah.
There's this other aspect that sometimes is a little bit more invisible, although I would say now in society it's becoming more common in a healthy way to talk about it, is some of the complexities of mental illness that some people live with that isn't necessarily a disability or special needs per se, but sometimes there's a lot of comorbidities and there's a lot of things that interfere with people's experience with church in society and how they can go about day to day finding that belonging. Have you had any experiences in your ministry helping people through some mental illnesses and supporting them in that journey as a pastor?
Unfortunately, at this point, we don't really have a formal ministry for that demographic. And we've talked about it a lot. It pairs often with the special needs ministry just because of that comorbidity component. And so I do a lot. And then we have what's called a Center for the City. So that's where people that are struggling financially or need a bit of extra support, new to Canada, that kind of thing. And so both of our areas tend to have a higher demographic of people with mental illness. And so we have talked quite a lot together and trying to build a structure of pastoral care in terms of being there, listening, praying, but also knowing when to actually access the resources that are out there. Just this past week, I had a conversation with someone who I actually don't know what, I can tell there was some sort of mental health concern. He was presenting very manic, and I was just listening to him, and then he just started talking about if he doesn't get help, there's going to be self-harm and things like that. And so he was going to come to the church and come talk to me some more, or find another pastor to talk to because maybe a man might be better. And he was just all over the place. And finally, I just stopped him and I said, I think you actually need to call 211, which has a distress number. Because at first I was feeling a little bit guilty about that because I'm like, surely we can do something to support this individual. And absolutely, we prayed together and things like that. But just knowing that we have external resources in this season when we don't have really any type of formal ministry, but just being able to walk alongside someone, be there to pray for them, get updates from them, knowing that you care. Yes, you can tell me the same story 20 times and I will still listen. I still love you. You are still a child of God in the midst of this. No, we don't understand all of what's going on, but God does. And let's see how we can work with community resources to support in that, recognizing our limitations as a pastoral team or as a church in terms of what we can and can't do. And he is now connected with a distress center and they're helping. I mean, he still wants to talk to me every day, and that's fine. I don't have a problem connecting with him, praying with him, and just being available. And I know that really helps him feel that he has a place within the church and he is still getting the help he needs. Just one very pertinent example that's just been part of my week this week. And I know many fall through the cracks still, but this is just one story that's just really fresh in my mind. And again, not doing everything we possibly could, but it's a starting place.
No, I think that's really good, Corinne, because I think no matter what role of ministry, whether we're in a pastoral role or part of any type of ministry, these are things that we will encounter. It's not necessarily even a department for a church to work through these are not people to be fixed, but people to find belonging with. And you even gave that beautiful example of referral. Like we're not here to fix people, but we can hold space for them, right? And even in our ministries, we are going to encounter mental illness and people going through challenges. And Jesus is such a beautiful example of being present, radically present in those spaces and being able to accept people however they present, but create felt safety and belonging that you obviously created with this individual, which is beautiful.
Yeah, and I just, one other part of it, sorry, I just wanted to add is we have a monthly potluck, and it is designated for our special needs ministry and their families. But he's like, well, can I come? And I'm like, absolutely. This is a safe place for you to come and absolutely be a part of this. We don't, we're not exclusive in terms of, potluck, you have to have a developmental disability to get in. No, we welcome everyone. And so it's next Friday night. So, I'm praying that he does come and find some connection within our community. Because again, we're not an exclusive community in and of itself either. We want people to find belonging within our community, no matter what they come with in terms of diagnosis or just lived experience, that they just need a place where they can connect in this season. So
yeah, and there's a cool resource. Friends of Care Impact, Daniel Whitehead runs a ministry called Sanctuary Mental Health. They have a beautiful resource and free resource for churches to lead in small groups, beautiful resources, not to try to get a handle on mental illness, but how do we create congregations that are safe places? How do we work through our own barriers so that we can create belonging and safety? Because we might feel that we have the perfect, most welcoming church, but those that are going through, it could be mental health, it could be disabilities or neurodivergence, all the things that we've been talking about, they will know if they're accepted. But we often have those blind spots. So this is a beautiful, graceful way of bringing awakening and awareness to everyday individuals on how do we all create that safety for people going through different illnesses and complexities that we might not be familiar with. And we don't have to know everything. We don't have to be psychiatrists to be able to help to create that belonging and presence. So,
and I believe they just came out with one for teenagers as well. So.
Yes, it is coming out for youth as well. There's a new one coming out, and I would highly recommend that all churches, check that out.
Yeah, we did it as a small group here at Care Impact, and it was really well done. Really impactful. I've worked with people with mental illness in the past, and I wish I would have had this information. And I believe the whole church really needs this. Definitely recommend that, and we'll throw in the show notes as well.
And another one that doesn't necessarily fit within what we would call special needs or disabilities or mental illness, but this whole area of people coming into our churches, into our communities with complex trauma. Whether in their past or they're living through current traumas right now. And that's something that our team has been passionately training churches to be trauma informed and to create felt safety in our churches. There's so many things that can alienate people. They have this radar if they belong or not. Is it a safe place for them or not? The most welcoming churches won't realize that, but if you don't fit this bill, you're not really going to fit in, or I can't really drop my mask. I have to pretend everything's okay. And so that is another area that actually is a barrier. It actually changes our biology and our wiring when we go through trauma, that there is healing, but something that also could be looked at to reduce the barrier within churches for people coming that are differently wired. I would love to shift over to your personal journey and dive into some more insights. There's so much within you that you come into this ministry with. Can you share a personal experience or encounter that has deeply impacted your understanding of inclusivity and why you are contending so hard in Calgary to create supports for the people you pastor?
Well, I've just felt that Center Street Church in general is quite accepting of those that are differently wired. And I'm sometimes just blown away. I'll sit in our cafe and I'll just observe the different engagements and interactions. And like you said, people are saying hi, they're welcoming, hey, sit together. Or, it's okay that, someone maybe awkwardly comes and interrupts a conversation, or they're very visible in our church. And I just love that generally they are accepted. Now, does that mean that they are belonging yet? Not really, but it's a definite start. And I just love that. I have one story that, well, I have a couple stories to kind of speak into this, but one story specific is we had a gentleman with Down syndrome who worked in our cafe for many years. And there's a lot of labeling that was going on at the time that everybody wanted to know what everybody's diagnosis was. And I was just like a little bit frustrated because I'm like, doesn't matter. They're persons first, like they're people, they have names. Let's use those identities. And so I was sitting there and I overheard one conversation on the one side of me. They're like, oh, I don't know where to put this tray. And across the room, he was putting things away and he was wearing a baseball cap. And the gentleman said, hey, that guy over there with the baseball cap, he's the one that you need to talk to for putting trays away. And my heart just about exploded because I'm like, oh, it wasn't the guy with the Down syndrome. It wasn't any of that. It was just so very exciting. And it just filled my heart to hear that people are getting the message that we're trying to say. And again, we are going behind the scenes and just trying to empower people so they are more comfortable. Like we have one gentleman that he will seek out one of our participants and he'll ask every day, how is it going? What's new? And they'll sit together and have coffee. And that's just been a very organic friendship, just because she's around. We have a midweek program that runs Tuesdays and Wednesdays. It started as not everybody impacted by disability can attend church because of situations and staffing and agency things. And so we started offering that on Tuesdays and Wednesdays and just different opportunities at different levels of understanding. So we have music for those that really can hear the gospel through music. We have a Bible study for those that want to be discipled more intentionally. We have horticulture for those that are more interested in learning about Jesus, but through creative means like horticulture. And then we have a social club. But we also have volunteering and just how the volunteers are appreciated. They clean the worship center one morning a week and people will go out of their way to come and just say hello and just thank them for what they're doing. And I just really appreciate that they're being acknowledged for being in church. And I mean, it shouldn't be that way. Everyone should just be more natural with it. But it's just a cool thing that is growing and developing and changing within the church environment. And
so you're actually creating belonging by involvement and not just serving people in a certain sector, but they are being grafted into volunteer positions and ministry leads. So they are actually leading your church into a greater understanding of inclusion and being blessed. That is beautiful.
I actually worked in that sector for several years where I provided supported employment for those living with disabilities. I always ask the question, like, where is the church and where can he contribute to the church? Why am I not seeing these with Down syndrome in the church? Where's that safe space? So hearing what you're doing here is really exciting, even for me. And I just have hope for those that I worked with in the past.
And I think there's a huge piece there that could go untapped and missed, that every single person is made in the image of God and they have inherent gifts and abilities that light them up, that actually contribute to the body of Christ. I think of some people that I know on the autism spectrum, perfect pitch, best sound, like you couldn't even get it on a computer. Why aren't they running our IT and our PA system? Because they will have it top notch. They are going to cringe and walk out of your building because the sound isn't right, but they've got it. What if we use their expertise in these ways to be able to serve the body of Christ rather than be people that are kind of on the fringe that will care for it of kind of charity? I think there's a lot of abilities there, no matter what the person is coming into the building with. Let's be curious on how has God wired them and what are the image-bearing qualities within them that the body of Christ would be missing.
Because they have spiritual gifts too, and they can contribute.
Oh, the prophetic. And there's so many ways that I have been ministered to by people that others would say might not. We don't know what to do with, you know?
And I would like to just add with that too is not to give up. Like we have one gentleman who is a little bit more complex on the autism spectrum, but he wanted to volunteer with kids. He wanted to be a one-to-one buddy. And so we put him in one environment and it failed miserably. So he thought he was done and the children's ministry was kind of like, okay, well, that didn't work. And so I just prayed about it because I'm like, no, this is his desire. He wants, like, this isn't the end. And so we figured out what was it that was lacking and it put him in an environment and he is thriving as a one-to-one buddy within a different environment that he is able to help this child. He's learning skills. He loves it. He's making connections, friends. He's part of a community that huddles together every Sunday before church and prays together. He shares his comments, hopes, dreams with them. And it's just, so we can't give up just because we've tried once and said, oh, you know what? Sorry, that didn't work. But we just got to keep trying and finding that niche, because I believe there is a niche for everyone to give of their gifts and talents to the church. It's going to look messy. It's going to look complicated, but we just need to be able to be willing to try. And just that belonging within the church will come when we are successful and we team together to work that way. Yeah, I just love being able to see those success stories.
And maybe that's the challenge to the broader church, those that haven't been facing some of these disabilities or special needs, that we need to overcome our insecurities and get vulnerable and tread into areas that we would otherwise not. But we're going to take risks. We're going to do things differently for the sake of inclusion, for the sake of creating belonging, even when we feel uncomfortable, and we often don't realize it. And I think also maybe you've experienced this in a day-to-day way, but when people come in with a disability or an exceptionality that is different, it makes their life harder to navigate. Let's just face it, there are some more complexities. When there's some things that are harder, I often find these individuals are exceptional in other ways. So maybe they don't have visibility. Maybe they don't have eyesight, but they are attuned to the emotions in the room, or they have a beautiful voice. Like they excel in other ways where they don't have abilities in certain capacities. And they actually have something to teach us in exceptional ways because of that.
And looking at how they're wired too, in terms of even just people skills, or like we have one lady who was visually impaired and had cerebral palsy, but she loved greeting people, and she was so friendly. And so for many years, she was the main greeter at one of our doors. Everybody knew her. She was just like such an important part of that ministry, that guest services ministry, and of just welcoming people and helping them feel welcome. And you wouldn't necessarily think it, because she's visually impaired and doesn't have much to give in our traditional sense, but just figuring that out and then just empowering them to move forward to be all they can be because of who God created them.
Well, Corinne, there is so many things that we could continue talking on. We will have to have you back, because I know there is more that we could dive into. I want to welcome listeners to put in their questions and feedback, and maybe we can follow up on this conversation. This is the kickoff to our Differently Wired in Community series, and I'm excited that we're going to be bringing guests on that are living in some of the exceptionalities that we've been talking about. They're going to be sharing their story of inclusion or their challenges that they've had within the churches. And we're going to have some rich conversations of them and also some other caregivers that are living out in these ways. And so, Corinne, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. Are there any final thoughts or words of encouragement that you would love to share with our listeners?
Well, I think an important part of belonging is absolutely making the facility accessible, like we talked about earlier. But I just wanted to talk briefly about making the gospel accessible to them. And I think that is something that I would love to challenge more churches to do. The traditional ways don't work for our group, a lot of them. And so what does it look like to introduce discipleship to someone? Is it a group of people coming together and doing a Bible study together, and how they can be challenged to grow in their relationship with Jesus? And what does that look like to, just to make the gospel accessible in terms of that type of example? I'm trying to think of an example right now, but just something that God has really placed in my heart these last few months as we're building a room and a space for our special needs community. He's kind of saying, that's good. But now what about the gospel? That is what's, God is, with the Great Commission, he has called all of us to go make disciples of everyone. And so the traditional gospel may not work for our group. And so, Corinne, what does that look like? What are you going to do about it? So that's kind of my challenge to put out there, is how do we make the gospel accessible as well?
That's great. Thank you so much. And yes, we are looking forward to more conversations, hopefully with you in the future. And we have some exciting guests coming on to tell their stories as well. So everyone out there, be sure to share the podcast with your friends and family, because this is something we want to see normalized in the church, where everybody can participate. Everybody has a role. Everybody has giftings that the church needs. And the Lord desires us all to be part of this great and wonderful church family. Thanks for listening. We will see you next week. Thank you for joining another conversation on Journey with Care, where we inspire curious Canadians on their path of faith and living life with purpose in community. Journey with Care is an initiative of Care Impact, a Canadian charity dedicated to connecting and equipping the whole church to journey well in community. You can visit their website at careimpact.ca or visit journeywithcare.ca to get more information on weekly episodes, Journey with Prayer, and details about our upcoming events and meetups. You can also leave us a message, share your thoughts, and connect with like-minded individuals who are on their own journeys of faith and purpose. Thank you for sharing this podcast and helping these stories reach the community. Together we can explore ways to journey in a good way. And always remember to stay curious.